Good morning, everyone. It's good to be here. I am grateful to have been invited. Rusty invited me to come and share on what I might be preaching about on the first Sunday of Advent, which is the Sunday of Hope. And I have to say to you right up front, he told me, don't come and preach. Just bring some ideas and some stories and some examples and tools that you might use and ideas that you have, but you don't preach. And I will tell you up front, it's going to be really hard for me not to preach. It's going to be hard for me not to preach and just share the ideas. So I'll try to live into that. And a word about the stories and the ideas and examples. One of the things I have preached Advent Sundays more than a few times. And so I have lots of stories that I have shared. And I got to tell you, in 2020 for Advent, those stories that I have shared in the past just seem pretty laughable and they seem pretty trivial when I think about what people are going through in 2020. When I think about what people might be waiting for in 2020. This year has been a year like no other, and everybody is saying that. And so all my stories, all my things that I have just didn't seem to work. And so Tim, could you put up my PowerPoint slide? And so what I did was I went and I bought a book. Olu Brown wrote this new book on Advent called Hope. And I said, oh, sure, there's going to be some ideas in there that I can use. Well, I didn't necessarily find any, but what I did find was this quote from John Wesley, which is where I'm starting today, which is this one, and I love it. Persons changed in a moment from the spirit of horror and fear and despair to the spirit of hope and joy and peace. And for me, I think that that is the way to describe this Advent journey that we're about to take with our congregations. We're doing it in a position where people are afraid, people are desperate, at least in my ministry setting, there's some desperation. There's horror when you think about how many people have died, how many people are sick, how many people tomorrow will be sick. And so we have to take them out of that everyday life that we're living in right now and take them to a place of hope and joy and peace that we know is what Advent is about. So if you could go to the next slide, Tim, that would be great. The current condition, when I think about the current condition in my ministry setting, what I would share with you is this. If you open, in my congregation, there are some well-to-do folks, but there are also some folks that are struggling. But let me share with you one family as an example of whom I'm going to be preaching to. One is this family, it's an extended family. We've got aging parents who are in the house. They're both battling chronic conditions. Okay, so they are sequestered away. They're beyond retirement age, so they're at home, and they're lonely. The mom of this this group has lost 4 siblings to COVID-19 death. And so the father has had people who have been in the hospital because of it. But anyway, they're sequestered at home. The adult children are both trying hard to find a job because where they were working, either their hours were cut drastically or they don't have a job anymore. And so they've got problems of their own about how are they going to make ends meet. They have children, and one of their teenagers is dealing with now an addiction situation. The other kid is really, really struggling with virtual school right now, and they're trying hard to keep that young man from dropping out of high school. And the other issue that is going on in this neighborhood in East Knoxville, where Lynn Encini is my church, where I am assigned, there is the gang problem is huge right now, and the violence as a result of the gangs is huge, and the seduction of our young youth and our young people by that because there's nothing else. And so this particular family is really struggling with challenges. This is an everyday challenge for them. And so, oh, and then there's also some, I suspect anyway, some domestic abuse issues going on too, because everybody is all in the same house. And these are difficult and hard things to go through. And then one more thing that I would add on top of that is there's police presence all the time in East Knoxville. And it's not necessarily police help, it's just presence. And so these are the kind of everyday scenarios that some of the folks in this neighborhood are dealing with. And so how do you preach into a current situation like that? How do you preach into the Advent and Christmas themes into a situation like that of hope and peace and joy and love, when all around you, you see everything that you see is struggle? And so what I would do usually when I am preaching is I have a special music or special selection just prior to me coming to preach. And in this, for this Sunday, what I would pick is a song by F.C. Barnes, and everybody in my congregation knows this song, as I do too, by heart. And it's called "I'm Coming Up on the Rough Side of the Mountain." It's the rough side of the mountain. And the one verse that I would say is relevant for us today is, "I'm striving to make it through this barren land, but as I go from day to day, I can hear my Savior say, 'Trust me, child, come on in and hold my hand.'" And so this is a day-to-day thing. Yes, it's a situation that's going on right now, but this is a daily thing for folks in my ministry setting right now. And so how do you preach into hope? And so next slide, please, Tim. So the hope that I hope to preach about in this, the idea that I have, has to do with trying to help the folks in that ministry setting, in that community, to recall what our inherent dignity is, and the fact that we are daughters and sons of God who loves us so much. We are so loved by God, even though the world does not treat us as such. Because as Doug alluded to, there are several pandemics that are affecting my community. And one of them that I didn't mention that I need to is racism. We live with that all the time. And so we hear now that there are vaccines coming and, things can go back to normal. But for us and in my community, normal is not what we want to go back to. We want to go back to something that's better than normal. But the thing is, the world is telling folks that we are less than, that we are not quite as. We can't include you because you're behind in school. I mean, you can pick your information that you want to use to fill in the blanks, but the overriding issue, the overriding hope that I hope to create as I preach through Advent is that these folks are daughters and sons of God, a God who loved them so much that God gave his only son. And you know this, and they know it too. And that's what I'm trying to help them recall, that he gave his only son so that everyone who believes in him won't perish, and that they will have eternal life. And indeed, God didn't send the son here to condemn as the world does. The world is condemning, but God sent his son to save, and so that the whole world would be saved. So my preaching goal for this Sunday would be, how do I help folks recall that dream of God's love in these days where it is really difficult to find hope. So how do they recall the dream of God? Well, one of the things that I am, if I'm anything as a preacher, I'm a lectionary preacher. So I'm going to go to the lectionary, and this lectionary reading from the Old Testament is the one that I think just really speaks it today. and speaks into today in 2020. And Tim, you can go ahead to the next slide. This is from Isaiah. The lection is from Isaiah 64, 1-9. And for us today, I'm not going to go through the entire 9 verses, but the operative, the focus verses are the first 3 that I have printed on the slide, because the goal is for God to come down. Okay, the focus is on those 3 verses where it's like, God, come down here. Okay, and so if only you would rip open the heavens and come down to earth. Okay, the heights and the depths would quake when you appear. If only you would come like that, so that all who deny or hate you, everyone would remember and everyone would know. If you just come down from the mountains and come down and be with us. I'm saying, so next slide, Tim. So, excuse me. So with this theme of come down here, which would be my theme, it's like, come God, if you would just come. And so we as pastors, and I as a pastor, I think that there are times like this in 2020 when we don't have specific answers. So for that family that I depicted for you earlier, I don't have specific answers. Yes, I can get them some help, but I don't have the answers to what's ailing them. But what I can do, and what I think we have to do in this pandemic, in this particular advent of 2020, is to be able to call God's presence down, and for people to remember that they can call on God, that maybe you will not have your answer today, but you call on God to be present with you as you live and as you go. And this will be a familiar theme, particularly for folks in my ministry setting, because this has been our life. When we look back on our ancestors who were enslaved, okay, they definitely had to pray and to wait for God's presence. When we look back on our ancestors who endured Jim Crow, they definitely had to pray and they had to wait on God's presence. And so that thinking will help people recall what God has done and how far God has brought us, even though it seems dark right now, and it is dark. The thing that I would also acknowledge, the other ideas that I have for the sermon would be to acknowledge that, yes, this is a dark time, and there is darkness that is all around us. It's in the form of grief and loss and pain and struggle and all of those things that people are living with today. And so we point that out, but we also show, on the other hand, the converse, which is Advent is the time for us to be aware. It's time for us to be aware of what is going on around us. It's time for us to realize that even in the most tragic of circumstances, there is compassion, there is human kindness that can heal and bring light. Advent is also a time, even though it's dark, but it's a time to understand and appreciate the darkness. There are times when that darkness is something that you need and that you need to understand and be okay with. I think back to one of the sweetest Advents that I went through was about 15 years ago, when my mom, who was dying of cancer at the time, and we knew that this was going to be her last Christmas. And she, as each Sunday went by, she was getting weaker and weaker. And I had taken, at the time, I was in another career, and I had taken leave to be with her during these last days. Well, she did make it through Christmas and New Year's. She didn't die until in January. But that sweetness of those dark times, those sad times that I was able to spend with her and she was able to spend with me, were a sweet time. It doesn't mean that God didn't come and heal the cancer, because he didn't, because she died. But the time, that is one of the most beautiful Advents that I have ever spent, was that time when I spent with my mom going through that cancer. And I'm an only child, so I was the only family. So it was just me and her. It was just sweet. It was just amazing and sweet. So Advent is also a time to appreciate. So another word that I would want to share with my folks is that we want to appreciate, as I said, we want to appreciate our ancestors and what we have gone through. And the fact that we've gone through that, it's in our DNA. We can get through this too. Yes, it's hard. And yes, the racism is back. Not that it was ever gone, but it is even more vicious these days. People are really angry at us just because we're Black, but we can get through this, and we will get through this. God will come down and be with us. And so what I hope to create in all of this is the hope that God will come down and walk with us through it, and walk with us until we get through it. And so that we will be able to see the glimpse of God's dream around us, so that we will be able to see that dream unfolding, even though and even in the midst of all of this darkness, that there is going to be some hope. And it's not just the traditional hope that some people typically might have wanted this time last year. This Advent was looking a lot different. But we still have that dream. We have that dream of God unfolding all around us, everywhere we look. So next slide, Tim. So how I would leave this sermon, and I'm done. I'm probably over my time, so I apologize. But there's a poem called Dreams by Langston Hughes. And so I would end my sermon as I think and encourage my folks to think about the season of Advent, to hold fast to the dream and hold fast to the dream of God. I would share this poem, which is: hold fast to the dreams, for if dreams die, life is a broken winged bird that cannot fly. Hold fast to dreams, for when dreams go, life is a barren field frozen with snow. And so the hope that I would hope to preach about for this first Sunday in Advent would be about this dream of God, and trying to help people who are going through a hard thing right now. And everybody is, I mean, not just these folks that I described to you. These are hard days, and but we still have that dream of God. We still have the hope that is always there, and that's what we hold on to. And yes, we can get through it because we have before. And so that those are my ideas. And what I would actually want to do is take this whole Old Testament lesson from Isaiah and treat it as a sermon series. So every single Sunday in Advent, I probably want to talk about a theme from that Isaiah reading. There's God's faithfulness. There's all kinds of things that would be relevant to folks these days. So that's what I would do going forward potentially. So anyway, that is what I would have. I would just say, during this Advent, we hold fast to our dreams. And that is not the dream of what was before. It's the dream of God and who we are in God. And then despite all the darkness, that's what we hold on to.